Welcome to Before It Breaks with Gabriella Pomare. This is the podcast for the conversations people usually have too late. The ones you have in your head before you say them out loud. The ones you type into your notes app but never send. The ones you whisper to a friend because you already know that if you say it to your partner, they are going to tell you that you are overreacting. I'm Gabriella Pomare. I'm a family lawyer, media guest, author of the collaborative Co-Parent. I'm a mum and I'm a co-parent. And this is where we talk honestly about modern relationships, marriage, separation, co-parenting, conflict repair, rebuilding, and the quiet things that happen before a relationship breaks. This podcast is not about perfect families. It is about conscious ones. For the before, for the break, for the becoming. And before we begin, let me remind you that this podcast is for general information and education only. It's not legal advice and it's not therapy. And it's not advice about your specific relationship. Every relationship, family, separation, co-parenting dynamic is different. Now, today's episode started with a DM that I got. A listener in LA sent me a message after the last episode, and I've not stopped thinking about it. I'm obviously not going to read her exact message, and I'm going to change the details because privacy matters. But the heart of it was this. She said, I love him. I really do. But I feel like I'm in a relationship with him and his ex. She texts all the time. Some of it's practical, but not all of it. She knows things about his day before I do. She calls when she's upset. He says I'm being insecure because they have history, but I feel like there are 3 people in this relationship and I'm the only one who's not allowed to say it. Honestly, I felt that one. Not because it's rare, because it is everywhere. The ex who never really left. The old flame who still messages, the colleague they once dated, the family friend who has always been complicated, the person in the friendship group everyone pretends is ancient history, the ex-wife or ex-husband they say are totally fine with, but somehow still emotionally orbit. The person they broke up with years ago but still answer like a partner. The person who has technically left the relationship but somehow still lives inside their emotional system. And this topic is messy because the answer's not always just cut them off. Sometimes there's children. Sometimes they work together. Sometimes they share friends. And sometimes their families are connected. Sometimes the ex is still part of the same community, workplace, friendship circle, school group, social scene, or extended family. Sometimes there is no realistic way for that person to disappear completely. And sometimes, honestly, they don't need to disappear. The issue is not always contact. The issue is access. Because contact is not the same as emotional access. That is the part people confuse. You can have a reason to speak to someone without giving them a front row seat to your inner life. You can be polite without being available. You can share children without sharing emotional intimacy. You can work together without private late night messages. You can have mutual friends without letting an old attachment quietly run the room. And you can respect the past without letting it govern the present. And that really is the conversation I want us to have today. Because sometimes people say we're just friends when what they really mean is we never fully detached. Sometimes they say we have to stay civil, and what they mean is I still feel responsible for how that person feels. Sometimes they say it was years ago when what they mean is I don't want to admit that this person still has emotional power over me. And sometimes they say you're insecure when what they really mean is I don't want to look at the fact that my past is still taking up space in my current relationship. And that is where people start to feel crazy. Because if you raise it, you sound jealous. If you ask why they're texting at night, you sound insecure. If you ask why this person knows so much about their life, you start to sound controlling. And if you ask why their mood changes after one message, you can sound dramatic. And nobody wants to be that person. Nobody wants to be the insecure partner, the jealous girlfriend, or the controlling boyfriend, or the difficult new wife, the dramatic person who just doesn't get it. So people swallow it. They try to be cool. They try to be modern. They say, "Ugh, everyone has a past." Yeah, everyone does have a past. You do have to accept that your partner had a life before you. You do have to accept that they may have loved people before you. You have to accept that not every ex is a threat. And you have to accept that some people genuinely can stay friendly. But you don't have to accept being in a relationship where the past has more power than the present. That is the difference. I mean, you can respect someone's history without living inside it. And you can be mature without becoming invisible. I think you can trust your partner without ignoring your body when something feels off. Because sometimes the third person in the relationship, they're not an affair partner. Sometimes it's just unresolved attachment or an ex who still knows how to pull a string. Sometimes it's the person they say is just a friend, but somehow that friendship has more emotional charge than it should. And sometimes it's the old flame who's not technically doing anything wrong, but somehow keeps appearing at exactly the wrong moment. Sometimes it's the person everyone has been trained not to question. And the relationship starts to feel crowded, even though nobody's cheating. And that's what makes it so confusing because romantic betrayal's not the only thing that can threaten a relationship. I mean, emotional dependence can threaten it, guilt can threaten it, unclear boundaries can threaten it, old roles and secrecy and comparison and avoidance can threaten it. Fear of upsetting someone from the past can threaten it. The past can still be in the room, even when the person's technically gone. And I think a lot of people listening know exactly what that feels like. Maybe your partner dated someone in your friendship group and everyone acts like it's ancient history, but there's still a certain charge between them. Maybe they work with someone they used to sleep with and they insist it's professional, but the messages are not always professional. Maybe they were married before with no children, but the ex still calls when she's lonely. Or maybe there's an old family friend that they once had a thing with, and the whole family still treats that person like they belong. Maybe there's someone from years ago who comments on every post and knows every update and somehow always has access. Maybe your partner says there's nothing going on, and maybe that's true. But nothing going on is not always the same as nothing there. Sometimes there's no affair, no secret relationship, no physical betrayal. But there's still emotional residue. There's still a private channel, still a loyalty, there's still guilt, there's still little performance. There's still a version of your partner that seems to come alive for that person. And that is where it really hurts because often the issue is not, I think you're cheating. The issue is, I don't feel protected. And that's a very different conversation. And I think partners need to understand that. When someone says, I feel uncomfortable with this dynamic, they're not always saying you're doing something terrible. Sometimes they're just saying, I can feel that there's no wall here. And relationships need walls, not prison walls, but healthy walls. A sense that there's an inside and an outside. A sense that some things belong to the relationship and not to everyone who came before it. A sense that the person from the past can be respected without being emotionally prioritized. And that's a really interesting one. Because boundaries are not about pretending the past never happened. They're about making sure the past knows its place. Now, let's be honest on both sides. Sometimes the new partner is just insecure and they hear the word ex and immediately feel threatened. Sometimes they want some kind of clean slate, and that's just not possible. Or sometimes they interpret ordinary politeness as intimacy. Sometimes they want their partner to prove love by being cold or rude or performatively detached. That's not healthy either. You can't ask someone to erase every person they ever loved, and you can't demand hostility just to feel reassured. You can't control every interaction your partner has with someone from their past. That's not love. That's fear trying to manage the room. So the question's not, should my partner never speak to an ex? Yeah, all right, maybe sometimes. But the better question is, what kind of contact are we talking about? Because there's a big difference between happy birthday, hope you're well, and I still feel like you're the only person who really understands me. There's a real difference between here's the work document and I had a terrible day. Can I call you? There's a difference between see you at dinner with the group and I miss how easy things were with us. And there's a difference between we need to coordinate the children's schedule and you always knew how to calm me down. One is ordinary contact. The other is emotional dependence. And when contact becomes emotional dependence, the current relationship will feel it, even if no one admits it. I mean, I think what this listener is asking me is how do I know if I'm being insecure or if something's actually wrong? That is the question. Because jealousy is not always immaturity. Sometimes jealousy is information. I know jealousy can be irrational, it can be controlling, it can turn itself into surveillance and suspicion and punishment and drama. But jealousy can also be a signal because sometimes jealousy is not always immaturity. Sometimes jealousy is actually information. I know jealousy can be irrational, it can be controlling, it can turn into surveillance and suspicion and punishment and drama. But jealousy can also be a signal. It can say, something feels unprotected here, or the boundary is unclear, or there's an intimacy here that doesn't feel appropriate. So rather than immediately shaming jealousy, maybe we need to get curious about it. Not obey it blindly, not let it drive the car, but listen to what it's trying to say. Because sometimes your jealousy is not saying, I want to control my partner. Sometimes it's saying, I don't feel secure in the structure of this relationship. And that's useful information. So instead of saying you're jealous as an insult, the partner might actually ask, what is making you feel outside our relationship right now? Imagine that. Imagine if instead of immediately defending the ex, the old flame, the colleague, the family friend, or the person from the past, someone became curious about the person in front of them. Because if your partner is consistently feeling displaced by someone from your past, something in the structure probably needs attention. It may be their insecurity, or it may be your boundaries, or it may be both. But dismissing it won't solve it. It'll just make them quieter. And quiet is not always peace. Sometimes quiet is someone beginning to detach, and that's how resentment starts. Not always loudly. A partner raises it once or twice or three times, and each time they're told they're overreacting. So eventually they stop asking. But they also stop relaxing, they stop feeling safe, and they stop bringing their full self to the relationship. And one day they're colder or less affectionate or less patient, less open. And the person in the middle says, well, why have you changed? But they haven't changed out of nowhere. They've adapted to being repeatedly made to feel secondary. That is the danger. You can't keep asking someone to be secure while leaving the door open to an old emotional attachment. And sometimes the person from the past is not even the main problem. Sometimes your partner feels like being needed. They like being the calm one, the special one, the one who still gets called, the one who still has influence, the one who can say they trust me or they need me or I'm just trying to keep things smooth. And maybe they are. But sometimes keeping things smooth is just avoiding a boundary. Sometimes it means I would rather you feel uncomfortable than deal with their reaction. And that's when the wrong person is being protected. And if you're the current partner, that can feel incredibly lonely because you're not asking for drama. You're not asking for cruelty. You're not asking for your partner to pretend they never had a past. You're asking for the relationship you're in to have a protected space around it. And I think that's fair. Now, guilt is a huge part of this. Guilt keeps old relationships alive long after they've ended. Guilt about leaving, guilt about hurting someone, guilt about moving on first, guilt about being happier or about the way things ended, guilt about the person who never fully recovered. And guilt can be very persuasive. It says just answer the call, just reply, just be kind, just don't upset them, just keep things smooth. And sure, kindness matters, but guilt is not the same as kindness. Sometimes guilt keeps everyone stuck. The person who feels guilty keeps overfunctioning. The person from the past keeps relying. The current partner keeps absorbing. And nobody's free. Real kindness after a relationship ends is not endless emotional availability. I think real kindness is clarity and consistency. It's not creating false hope. And it's not keeping someone emotionally attached because you don't want to feel like the bad guy. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is stop letting someone rely on a version of you that no longer exists. Because if you're no longer their partner, you can't keep being their emotional partner. Yeah, you can still be polite and respectful, and you may still care about them as a person. I mean, you might share children, friends, work, community, or a family history. But care needs a container because if it doesn't get one, the old relationship keeps breathing. So I think you're going to ask me, what do healthier boundaries look like? I think healthier boundaries look like keeping communication practical when practical is required. I think boundaries look like not replying immediately unless something is genuinely urgent. They might look like not sharing intimate details about your current relationship, and they might look like not using an ex, an old flame, or a former almost something for emotional support. They might look like not having private conversations you would feel strange about your partner overhearing. They might look like saying, I'm sorry you've had a hard night, but I'm not the right person for that conversation anymore. And that sentence may feel brutal, but sometimes it's the sentence that finally tells the truth. I'm not the right person for that conversation anymore. That sentence may feel brutal, but sometimes it's the sentence that finally tells the truth. I'm not the right person for that conversation anymore. Because sometimes the problem's not that the other person asks, it's that you keep answering. And every time you answer in the old role, it reinforces the old attachment. Boundaries aren't just about what you say, they're about what you keep rewarding. People learn what gets a response. And if you want the pattern to change, the response has to change. Now, if you're the current partner listening to this, I want to say something to you directly. You're allowed to want boundaries. You're allowed to feel uncomfortable if someone from your partner's past has too much emotional access. You're allowed to say, this is affecting me. But you also need to be careful not to make your fear the ruler of the relationship. The more helpful conversation is not, you can never speak to them again or don't text them. It's, I'm not asking you to erase your past. I'm asking you to talk about what feels appropriate for our relationship now, or something like, I'm struggling with the personal nature of the contact and I need you to create clear boundaries. That last part matters because if your partner can't see it, you have a bigger problem. If every concern of yours is dismissed, or if every boundary is treated as jealousy and every conversation becomes, oh, you're insecure, then eventually the current partner stops trying to explain. They just start protecting themselves. And sometimes that means leaving. Not because they couldn't handle the past, but because they were tired of being in a relationship where the past had more authority than the present. Now, if you're the person in the middle, the one with the current partner and the complicated ex, you have a real responsibility here. Leadership in this situation means you can't simply respond to whoever is the most emotional in the moment. Leadership actually means asking, what is respectful to my current relationship? What is appropriate with this person now? What pattern am I reinforcing? Am I acting from guilt? Am I avoiding a boundary because I don't want conflict? Would I be comfortable if my partner had this same dynamic with someone from their past? And that last question is always revealing. Would you be comfortable if your partner's old flame called late at night? Would you be comfortable if your partner shared emotional support with someone they used to love? Would you be comfortable if your partner's mood changed every time that person messaged? Would you be comfortable if you were told to stop being insecure every time you noticed? And if the answer is no, then you probably already know something needs to change. And that's the thing. It's not about shame, it's about honesty. Because a lot of people don't mean to keep the past emotionally present. They drift into it. They keep the same communication style because changing it feels awkward, or they keep answering because not answering feels rude. They keep being available because they're used to being needed. But after a relationship ends, normal has to be rebuilt. You don't get to keep all the old habits and expect the new relationship to feel secure. Something has to be renegotiated. That's the hard work. It's not always glamorous, it's boring and adult and practical. It's saying, I'm not available for this conversation, or please send that by text, or I'll respond when I can, or I care about you, but I cannot be your emotional support in that way. Or I want to be respectful, but we need clearer boundaries. That's not cruel, that's clean. And clean is sometimes better than warm and confusing. Can you be friends with an ex? Yes, sometimes. Some people genuinely can. Some relationships end in a way where friendship is possible and respectful and not threatening to anyone else. Some exes have healthy boundaries. Some current partners are secure. Some blended families and workplaces and friendship groups and communities manage this beautifully. That exists. And when it exists, it is wonderful. But friendship with someone from your romantic past requires more honesty than people think. It really requires asking, is this friendship clean? Does my current partner feel respected? Would I behave the same way if everyone could see the whole conversation? Is there any part of me that likes keeping this person close because I still need something from them emotionally? Is this actual friendship, or is it unfinished business? Because friendship is not the same as attachment. And some people call it friendship because that sounds more evolved. They say, we're just really close. Maybe. Or maybe the relationship never fully ended. Maybe you stopped sleeping together, but the emotional dependency kept going. Maybe you stopped dating, but kept the expectation that you would regulate each other. Maybe you stopped being partners, but still act like the first call. That's not friendship. That's an old relationship in a new outfit. So, yes, be friends with an ex if it's clean and respectful and boundaried and not costing your current relationship its safety. But if the friendship requires secrecy and defensiveness, comparison, emotional intensity, or your current partner constantly feeling like they're intruding on a bond they can't question, then maybe it's not as healthy as you think. So I want to bring this back to my listener over in LA, because what I kept thinking after I read her message was this. She wasn't asking to be the only person who mattered. She was asking to know where she stood. And I think that is what so many people want. They want to know where they stand. They want to know that the relationship they're building is not constantly being negotiated with someone outside it. They want to know that their partner can be kind to someone from the past without being emotionally available in the old way. They want to know that when they say, this hurts, they're not immediately being labeled insecure. And they want to know that the new relationship has a protected space around it. And I don't think that's unreasonable, because love needs a place to live. It needs a room, emotionally speaking. And if the past is always in the doorway, the new relationship never fully settles. It becomes cautious. It becomes reactive. It becomes full of little hesitations. Can I say this? Will I sound jealous? Am I allowed to ask? Will plans change? Will I always come second to a dynamic I did not create? And over time, that wears people down, not loudly, quietly, which is usually how things break. So maybe the question isn't, is this person still around? Sometimes they will be. The better question is, what role do they still have? Are they a friend, a co parent, a colleague, a family friend, a source of guilt, an emotional emergency contact? Are they a person your partner still performs for, a person whose mood still controls your house? Are they a person your relationship has to keep organizing itself around? That is where the truth is. Because sometimes the ex is technically gone, but structurally still present. The structure matters. And if your partner says there's nothing romantic there, maybe that's true. But romantic is not the only category that can threaten a relationship. Emotional dependence can threaten it. Guilt can threaten it. Unclear boundaries can threaten it. Old roles, avoidance can threaten it. The relationship can be crowded even when nobody's cheating. And maybe that is the point of this episode. Not every third person in a relationship is a lover. Sometimes the third person is an unresolved attachment. Sometimes it's the old flame. Sometimes it is the family friend or the colleague or the ex who still knows how to pull the string. Sometimes it is the past sitting at the table being treated like it has more rights than the present. And if that is happening, it needs to be named, not with rage, not with accusation, not with you can never speak to them again, but with honesty. Something like, I'm not asking you to erase your past, but I'm struggling with the emotional access this person still has. And I need us to create clearer boundaries so our relationship has space to breathe. That's a hard sentence. But sometimes hard sentences are kinder than quiet resentment. Because if you don't name it, it will not disappear. It will just become the thing you fight around. You will fight about dinner, but really it's about the ex. You'll fight about plans, but really it's about an old flame. You'll fight about tone, but it will really be about the person nobody's allowed to question. And underneath all of it will be the same ache. I don't feel protected in this relationship. And that's what really needs to be heard. Not obeyed blindly and not used as a weapon, but heard. Because the goal is not always to make the person disappear. The goal is to make the boundaries clear enough that everyone knows where they stand. And when everyone knows where they stand, the whole system can calm down. It doesn't mean everyone will like it. Boundaries do often upset the people who benefited from the blur. But clarity is usually better than emotional fog. So if you are in this situation, maybe the starting point's not a dramatic ultimatum. Maybe it's simply asking yourself, what is appropriate contact and what is emotional access? What communication is necessary and what communication is habitual? What am I calling kindness that's actually guilt? What am I calling jealousy that might actually be information? What am I protecting by avoiding the conversation? And what role does this person from the past still have in the present? And if the answer makes you uncomfortable, that doesn't mean you're wrong. It probably means you have found the real conversation. So, to my listener in LA who sent that message, and to anyone else who feels like they're living with the ghost of a relationship they weren't part of, I want to say this. You are not automatically insecure because you can feel someone else in the room. Sometimes you're picking up on a lack of boundaries. And to the person with the complicated past, trying to build something new while managing the old, I want to say this. You are allowed to have a past, and you're allowed to care about people. You're allowed to be respectful. But if you want a new relationship to feel safe, you have to make sure the old one has actually changed shape. Not disappeared, changed shape. Because sometimes the third person in the relationship is not the affair partner. It's just the ex who never really left. I'm Gabriella Pomare, and this is Before It Breaks. And if this episode made you think of someone, send it to them. Or maybe just sit with it first. Because sometimes the question is not whether someone from your past is still in your life. Sometimes they are. The question is whether they're still in your relationship. And that is a very different thing.